Whether you're single, dating, engaged, or married, we are so happy you are taking the time to learn more about natural family planning. In the 3 sections of this video, we're going to cover information on the female cycle, the various methods of natural family planning, the philosophy and theology behind these methods, and finally, testimony from couples using NFP to hopefully answer questions you might have. Some of our presenters are professional healthcare workers, some of them are trained instructors in NFP, some are clergy, some have extensive ministry and teaching experience. All of them are volunteers who blessed our diocese with their witness because of their passion for this topic and their conviction that NFP is an incredible grace which benefits any individual or couple who chooses to embrace it. Everything presented here is intended to supplement your current level of understanding on these various topics, in the hope that you'll go beyond this introduction and commit to fully learning a proven method of natural family planning. For most of us, the topic of human fertility was covered in a rather scattered fashion during our time in school. Maybe a little bit in 9th grade biology, maybe a little bit more from your high school health class. Some of us might have heard a half-decent talk about Christian chastity while attending church youth groups, which helped us to understand the religious aspects of human sexuality. Others might have even had our parents talk us through these issues, and those conversations might have stuck in our minds, guiding us through our formative years. Whatever your particular level of knowledge is about human fertility, this time, the fact is, many individuals enter into their adult years with a shaky grasp of how new human life is conceived. A survey from the academic journal Fertility and Sterility polled 1,000 women aged 18 to 40. It found that only 10% of respondents understood that intercourse should occur before ovulation for the best chance of conception. Another study in the same journal concluded that, quote, fertility knowledge is low among U.S. women of reproductive age, including those with children and even among medical trainees, unquote. Some women are blessed to get established with a helpful primary care physician or OBGYN who they can have open dialogue about fertility and receive good education on key concepts. But for those women who don't have that relationship with a physician and the men who are on even shakier ground, it's helpful to establish a baseline knowledge of human fertility before venturing into the whys and hows of different natural family planning methods. So let's start out by defining the key terms and basic principles we need to understand in order to move ahead. First, natural family planning. It's an umbrella term. It normally refers to the systematic methods which we will introduce later on. Now, you might have heard phrases such as fertility awareness or fertility awareness methods or even fertility awareness-based methods. These almost always refer to the same approaches we're going to cover. Next, human fertility. It is the state of being capable to conceive and bear new human life via the sexual act. For both men and women, this capability sets in during puberty. A human male would be considered fertile for as many years into their lives as they can engage in sexual intercourse. Barring complications, a male can fulfill his role in conceiving new human life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, from adolescence to well past middle age and even into the elderly stages of life.
So women's fertility is a lot shorter than a man's. A girl is going to go through puberty typically around 12 to 13 years of age, and then she's going to go through menopause between 40 and 50. And so you do have a lot shorter time frame. The ovaries, which are where the eggs are stored for a female, have the ability to have about 220,000 eggs per ovary by the time the woman is an adult, but she's only going to need 400 to 500 of those in her lifetime. And so much of the woman's cycle is kind of a state of preparation. And so you have an egg being matured inside that ovary, then it's going to be released, and then the body is going to prepare or continue to prepare the uterus really for a baby. If that doesn't happen, then the lining of the uterus is going to come off, and then you start the next cycle again. So in the typical 28 to 35 day cycle, a woman is potentially fertile maybe between 5 and 9 days. And so there is a big difference if you were to compare 35 days for a man and 35 days for a woman. You typically with women just do have that very small time frame. As far as eggs being released, sometimes there's what's known as a double ovulation, and that's where multiple eggs are released, but it is still within a 24-hour window. And so even if 2 or 3 eggs are released and you have twins or triplets, it's still, again, within that 24-hour window of fertility. And so there's really not a big window of fertility for the women.
Another term, family planning. The U.S. federal government, along with many other governments and advocacy groups, speak often about family planning, but they have much different ideas about its meaning compared to people who advocate natural family planning. The broader cultural definition almost always means using artificial means of contraception on a consistent basis without having to refrain from sex so you can have the exact number of children you feel you are ready for when you want to. In some instances, there are organizations that would even include permanent sterilization and the use of the Plan B or morning after pill as a version of family planning services. Now, for us, for our purposes, family planning is best summarized by Pope St. Paul VI in his 1968 encyclical Humana Vitae, or On Human Life. Quote, "If therefore there are well-grounded reasons for spacing births arising from the physical or psychological condition of husband or wife, or from external circumstances, the Church teaches that married people may then take advantage of the natural cycles imminent in the reproductive system and engage in marital intercourse only during those times that are infertile, thus controlling birth in a way which does not in the least offend moral principles."
With these terms defined, let's take a closer look at the linchpin of all natural family planning methods, the female cycle. Almost all of us have a basic understanding of what constitutes the female reproductive system: ovaries, fallopian tubes, the uterus, the cervix. But a cycle involves much more than this and produces key indicators which we can follow to know precisely where we are in the cycle and what the likelihood for pregnancy is. Every month, the pituitary gland releases a key hormone known as follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH. FSH tells the ovaries to produce a number of fluid-filled cysts called follicles. As the follicles grow, they secrete a second hormone, which many people are already familiar with, estrogen. Estrogen works to thicken the wall of your uterus in preparation for pregnancy. Around day 7 of your cycle, the follicles stop growing except for one. This follicle continues to grow and to nourish a maturing egg or oocyte within. Around day 12, the maturing follicle releases a burst of estrogen into the bloodstream. The estrogen travels through your blood. When the estrogen, along with a small amount of progesterone, reaches the pituitary gland in your brain, the pituitary gland responds by releasing a third hormone, luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, gives the follicle a sudden growth spurt. In addition to thickening the wall of the uterus and triggering the release of luteinizing hormone, estrogen also impacts the mucus produced by the cervix. The additional estrogen causes the consistency of the mucus to change from tacky and not stretchy to a clearer and stretchier state. This type of mucus is designed to give sperm a lifespan as long as 5 days inside the woman's body, so that sperm can more easily meet the ovum released at the time of ovulation. Optimal mucus also assists sperm in moving from the vagina through the cervix and into the fallopian tube to meet the egg. Right before ovulation, the egg inside the follicle detaches itself. The follicle starts to release chemicals that encourage the nearby fallopian tubes to move closer and surround the follicle. The follicle swells until it bursts open, ejecting the egg and fluid into the abdominal cavity. Small finger-like protrusions at the end of the fallopian tube, called fimbriae, sweep across the burst follicle and pick up the egg. The egg is transported to the entrance of the fallopian tube. Once inside the walls of the fallopian tube, muscle contractions push the egg gently towards the uterus. The egg will either meet sperm on its journey through the fallopian tube and fertilization will happen, or it will arrive in the uterus unfertilized and be absorbed back into the body. It's important to note that right after the egg is released into the fallopian tube, the burst follicle now becomes the corpus luteum, which brings yet another hormone into the equation, progesterone. This hormone is a vital component of supporting new life if fertilization has occurred by enriching the uterine lining for possible implantation of an embryo. It also sends feedback to the pituitary gland to suppress the possibility of any further ovulation in the cycle, in the rare instance that a second follicle had formed in the ovary. There is much more to say about the intricacies of the female cycle as well as the miracle of conception, but hopefully this gives you a clear understanding as to how grounded the various NFP methods are in biological facts. Now we move into the specific methods used to carefully monitor the physical signs which give us a clear picture about fertility at any given time.
Dr. John Billings, who is from Australia, was a neurologist, and he was charged with the investigation of how the body would actually respond and show biomarkers that would allow you to chart fertility and understand when you were fertile or not, for a woman to know when she was fertile or not. We know that men, unless there's a medical reason, fertile 24/7. But he started this in the 50s, about 1953, and he began to investigate using what was already known by then. There were already methods of basal body temperature, there are calendar rhythm methods, and knowledge about fertility overall, menstrual cycles. And so as he progressed, he eventually came up with a method that charted cervical mucus, but also charted basal body temperature. And he was joined by his wife, Dr. Evelyn Billings, who was a pediatrician as well. And together in around 1965 came up with the Billings method, more or less as what it is today, except for that around 1970, 71, 70 was when basal body temperature was dropped. It was deemed unnecessary as far as using it with the authentic Billings method. Around 1970 as well, the WHO, the World Health Organization, recognized the Billings method as a method that could be used as a means to postpone or achieve a pregnancy, and actually gave it the name the Billings method, even though the Billings started out as calling it the ovulation method. A couple and a couple's fertility is mostly dependent on the fertility of the woman. And so the cervix, which is the bridge between the uterus and the vagina, has little tiny glandular crypts that produce a mucus fluid that is released in response to different hormones. At the opening of the vagina, at the vulva, a woman has very sensitive tissues that can sense up to 5 microliters of mucus. And so a woman can monitor, become aware or conscious of what she senses at the vulva. And she can then decide by the end of the day what was the most fertile sign that she's seen. Is it, is there something, any sensation, or is there any appearance, one or the other, or both, that she can describe? And we try to simplify it, use 1 or 2 words to describe what you see, or 1 or 2 words to describe what you feel, what you sense. And that allows her to chart. And for the lack of any sensation or appearance, we use green stamps. For the appearance of mucus, initially at least we use white stamps with a baby silhouette on it, because it kind of gives you possible fertility. When there's any kind of bleeding, whether it's menstrual or other bleeding, we use red stamps. And then sometimes we use yellow stamps in particular situations to denote infertile discharges. But that's how she charts, and throughout a cycle, she would see a visual pattern that allows her to kind of understand when she is fertile and when she's not. So I would say the average is 3 months of charting, or 3 regular cycles, on average, in which she has an opportunity to really observe her patterns and allow that to help her. Now, there are some women that actually learn it very quickly, and within 2 weeks they got it. And then there are some that take more than 3 months. So that's why I would say the average is about 3 months of charting before she can actually get fairly comfortable.
When Dr. Thomas Hilgers was reading Humanae Vitae, and he felt that strong call to the men of science to produce a system, he started researching, of course, was looking into Dr. Billings' method, and he actually started working with Dr. Billings to create the Creighton model system. And so through that, he developed not only a system that could be used to avoid or achieve pregnancy, but also a system that could address reproductive issues that the woman might be having, and actually be able to treat that, and even prior to that, evaluate that, so that these women could have real help. And so the difference between this system and some other systems is that the way that you look at the mucus is much more specific, and you're looking for color, and the length and lubrication is also potentially seen. Creighton uses cervical mucus as the biomarker, and this cervical mucus is only observed with Creighton externally. There's no internal observations at all. And what happens is you start to go into a time of fertility when the estrogen levels in the body start to build up. And so this is going to start as a sticky or a tacky type mucus. Now that is not a feeling like we would normally think of. It's a measurement only. So sticky is 1/4 of an inch, tacky is 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch in length. Typically that type of mucus is cloudy in color. Then you get to what's known as a stretchy type mucus. This again is not a feeling, it's only a measurement. So stretchy is 1 inch or more in length, typically clear in color. It's during that time that women can feel lubrication when they wipe as well at some times. You normally have 3 to 4 days of that stretchy clear mucus with the potential of lubrication. Then you get to the peak day. The peak day is going to be the last day when you see either clear or the stretchy or the lubricative mucus. You only need one of those though, you do not need all 3. We looked at a whole cycle of charting, a cycle being from the first day of bleeding till the day before the next period starts. You're going to start with days of bleeding, typically 3 to 7 days of bleeding on the chart. What that's going to look like is just some red stamps across the chart, and then the woman would chart if she's having a heavy flow, a light flow, very light flow, that type of thing. Then typically she goes to days of dryness, and that's where you're not seeing any mucus and you're not seeing bleeding. She also will chart that in word form underneath that just to say, hey, this day was dry. Then after that point, she starts to see the mucus that I referred to. Normally you have 5 to 6 days of seeing mucus during that cycle, and then she gets to what's known as the peak day. That's going to be the last day that she sees either clear mucus, stretchy mucus, or lubricative mucus. She only needs one, not all three. So you have to kind of look back the day after that to identify your peak day or around ovulation. After that point, it is typically dry for the rest of the cycle. And so within those first 3 days after the peak, she has a different color stamp because it's still during fertility. So that's the green baby stamp that you'll see here and there. But then after that point, it goes back to solid green. So you have predominantly on the chart green, you have some red at the beginning, and then in the middle you have these white babies. For the first 3 months, or really about 3 cycles, you do it on an actual paper chart. But then after that point, the couple or the individual woman has the ability to use the Creighton model app. And this was developed in the end of 2019, and it is exactly like the paper charting, just done through a computer or through your phone. There is the ability to access it on multiple devices, and so the husband could be accessing it one place and the wife another, and they would still have all of the information. So since the late 70s, through all the research that's been done and the thousands and thousands of charts that's been looked at, they have found that the method effectiveness, which is with perfect use, is 99.5% effective, and with actual use, it is 96.8% effective through these effectiveness studies. Comparing that with birth control, which is actually evaluated on the whole 35-day cycle and then divided out, Creighton is only evaluated during the time of fertility and then divided out. So even if you have a 96% effectiveness rate with birth control, it's really a lot less than that because of them dividing it out the way they do.
So Sympto-Thermal is different in that it takes mucus and simplifies it a little bit from Creighton. We focus on sensations and characteristics, but there's really only 3 categories. And then it adds temperature, which is the big difference between it and the other methods. Temperature is the check and balance. Mucus is still the absolute most important sign, but temperature is a confirmation that ovulation has occurred, and it's very helpful for transition from am I fertile to I'm definitely not fertile. And that's one of the biggest differences. Your charts, basically, the phase 1 and part of most of phase 2 are usually we see in the lower 97 range. And then when you ovulate, they jump. They have to jump at least 0.4 degrees. So you go from like a 97.4 to a 97.8 or higher. And that tells you whether or not you have ovulated. And it's that way every single cycle you ovulate. You have to see that significant jump. And if you look at a chart, it's down here, and then it spikes. And then it stays up. And it stays at that level until your period, and at which point it drops, which is also kind of a nice indicator for a woman. When they take their temperature in the morning and see that drop in temperature, they know their period's likely coming and they can prepare if they need to. The basic day-to-day for a woman while charting in Sympto-Thermal includes taking your temperature at relatively the same time each morning. This doesn't have to be exact, but you want to be able to compare day to day. Also taking or observing your mucus signs each time you go to the bathroom, and then just a general awareness throughout the day. It's not much more than that, and it becomes really second nature. And so that's the day-to-day charting. And then when you're interpreting, you interpret at different stages. There are different markers throughout the cycle that you have to determine whether or not you're infertile or fertile. So you have essentially 3 phases. Phase 1 is your period and a brief time of infertility. Then phase 2 is fertile, and phase 3 is infertile again. So the marker from phase 1 to phase 2 is entirely based on mucus, and then from phase 2 to phase 3 is temperature.
And you have the pre-shift 6 and the temperature rise that shortly follows. And with that, what we're looking for is a statistically significant change, right? We are not looking for some wishy-washy kind of thing. This is based on charts for thousands of people.
Thousands of cycles.
Right, so this is a very scientifically mathematical model that this is based on. And so these rules you can follow to say with great certainty when you have transition between the phases. And that's something that I think a lot of the guys get excited to do. They can actually be involved with this. And, it takes a little while to learn the rules, but then it becomes second nature. Like you were saying with the mucus, it becomes second nature to interpreting them. And you can do it on the paper charts. We usually have couples do that for a while. You can also do it in the app. CCL releases a great app, and that is pretty unique to the Sympto-Thermal method to have that app. Mm-hmm. And it's really nice because it also interprets the chart for you, so you can double check your answers.
Like a third check and balance on top of everything else.
And synchronizes between our phones. A lot of the methods, it's hey honey, how about tonight? No. And women don't want to be
the
gatekeeper, right? That's no fun to tell somebody no. So I think this is a really powerful tool to be able to synchronize that between your phones, to be able to look and to have discussions on whether or not you are open to children at the time, or if that's not a right time in your life for children. And so you can each look at the data and use it and make the right decisions together, as opposed to one person making those choices for you. I think that's a huge benefit in the Sympto-Thermal method.
So the Sympto-Thermal method, at least through CCLI, is 99.7% effective for perfect use, 98.2% for actual use, so what they actually see couples doing on a day-to-day basis. And that compares with things like artificial birth control. Artificial birth control is about 99.3% effective, whereas that's perfect use, so that's taking it at the same time every day, reading all the instructions that come with the prescription. Whereas actual use, if they skip a day, is closer to 93 to 96% effective.
And so that effectiveness equates to about 3 out of 1,000 times a failure on the Sympto-Thermal method, which is extremely good in comparison to the other methods, especially if you compare it to something like a condom, where the user effectiveness is just horrendous.
It's more like 75%.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big deal in these multiple methods, not just Sympto-Thermal, but all the different methods that you're learning about today, that there is so much knowledge that you are being given by taking these classes and learning about the methods that you otherwise don't receive. And so you get a much higher effectiveness because you actually get to know your body, and that's a really cool thing.
So a third researched biomarker that a woman can understand within her own body are urinary metabolites of hormones. So the hormones produced in the body, you actually will have a metabolite of that that's excreted in your urine. And you can test that with test strips. So one such monitor, the Clear Blue Fertility Monitor, will monitor estradiol, that metabolite, as it rises in the urine. And also it will catch luteinizing hormone as it rises in the urine. So to test with first morning urine every day, using such a monitor would catch those hormones as they're rising, so to speak. So it would give a warning of, hey, fertility is rising. And then the couple can use that information toward their desires. And then it reaches a peak fertility, and then it will give an indicator that the fertility is no longer peak. Ovulation can be assumed to have been occurred at that time, and once the fertile window is passed, you don't have to continue every day if you don't want to continue. Charting is essential for understanding. You pay attention to your body, what biomarker that you're following in Marquette. It's that urine, what this test strip shows. And then when you put it on paper, you learn to understand what that means. And with the Marquette method, if it's reading as high fertility and you're wanting to avoid a pregnancy, then you would avoid being intimate. And then if you wanted to achieve a pregnancy, that's when you would be intimate together. But looking at it on paper or online or in an app, the main thing is you taking what you understand about your body, putting it in, and then looking at it and understanding it. And a lot of times that means that you have to sit down with a teacher so that you understand what this chart is showing you. Because if you've got the biomarker and you're putting it down, but you don't know what it means, then it's not effective at all. So real teaching is essential. This is such an exciting time because we do have so many biomarkers that we can follow just with our watch. I think for now what we have with research is the proven biomarkers would be cervical mucus, body temperature, and then the urine metabolites. If you read about how your heart rate might change with your fertility, like if you're more fertile, your heart rate goes up. I don't think that's been proven yet. So, and then any biomarker that you follow, be it mucus or temperature, it's putting it into the app and then taking what you've learned as to what that means. That's the real, that's when it's effective. If someone just picks up a period tracker app and it gives you a predicted date of fertility, if all the information she's put into that app is just her bleed dates, then that's basically the rhythm method. It's just a mathematical algorithm that calculates you might be fertile in this time. But different apps, such as FEM or the different methods might have developed their own app. They're basically allowing the user to input her own biomarkers into the app, and then she is able to take what she's learned and say, okay, this is my fertile window. So different technological advancements will allow us to check our biomarkers in different ways. Like you can actually have a Bluetooth thermometer now, and you can actually have a vaginal Bluetooth thermometer that will send your temperature reading to your phone or to your watch. But and the monitor, when you test your urine strips, that information is only useful and only proven to be effective if you take that information in with the teaching so that you understand what days are fertile and what are not. So really just tracking your temperature is not helpful if you don't understand what it means. Same thing with paying attention to your mucus. So you really have to understand what it means for it to be efficacious.
Anyone who's ever fallen in love will likely nod their head in agreement with this Old Testament passage from the Song of Songs. When you experience attraction, love, you notice it can overwhelm your senses and your reason. Flashes of fire, floodwaters, arm tattoos, precious jewelry, delicious food and drink. These are the types of things that spring to mind when you think of a person who's madly in love. The fact that these lines are taken from the Holy Bible itself may be shocking, but they serve as proof that such desires, they come from God Himself. They are a gift to be enjoyed, but also pondered and prayed over. Human love and sexual desire, they're divine creations that can help us understand who God is. Who is God, by the way? Another book in the Bible states it rather plainly. God is love. You might hear this and say, yes, duh, God is love. But how absurd would it be to say something like Jimmy is love or Jane is love? Personal beings love, but they aren't in themselves the very definition of the word. However, God is the very act of love itself. How? Well, Jesus reveals that God is a communion of love, one being, three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. What do these three divine persons do for all eternity? Well, quite simply, they love one another, totally. They receive each other's love, perfectly. They create everything that exists and hold it in the palm of their hand as an overflow of the love they share. God exists not as a static, immovable object, but a dynamic exchange of love constantly in motion. It's difficult to imagine such a being, but the burning bush from the book of Exodus is a helpful image for our understanding of God being love. It's a love that always is burning brightly, but never consumes or destroys its object. God's love is fiery and passionate, while also creating and sustaining and nurturing life. Okay, what does all that have to do with the question of sex, of contraception, of childbearing? Well, sexual intercourse has two ends, or results, or functions, whatever you want to call it. And these are discernible by all people, regardless of their faith background. Purpose number one is to bring about a deeper, more loving union between a man and a woman. The pleasure and intimacy of sexual intercourse are meant to unite us. Purpose number two is to create new human life. Pretty straightforward. Love babies. Now, not every act of sexual intercourse automatically leads to a new human life. Neither, sadly, does every individual subjectively experience the greatest feeling of intimacy or pleasure or unity with their partner during each act of intercourse. Still, even though both ends are not experienced every time, it's hard to argue against these being the two dominant effects of sex. The question is, though, do we always want both results of the sexual act? If you ask the average person, do you desire pleasure, intimacy, love from every single sexual encounter? The answer would be yes, followed by a puzzled look wondering, why would you ask a question with such an obvious answer? Even in a day and age when hookup culture is rampant and many individuals engage in sex, the simple aim of experiencing pleasure, hopefully with an attractive counterpart, everyone can still see that sex between two individuals who are deeply committed to one another is preferable to a random one-night stand between two people who might not even know each other's last names. Despite massive cultural shifts, the human heart remains the same. We want to be loved and to love. Pleasure alone is not enough. Okay, so we always want that first end of unity, intimacy, love. Now, ask the same person, do you desire a new baby from every single sexual encounter? And you will get a similarly puzzled look, wondering, why would you ask a question with such an obvious answer? No, I don't want a new baby every single time I have sex. While most men and women do desire to become parents at some point in their lives, even those who naturally desire a big family, or come from a big family, they don't want a new baby from every single sexual encounter. So then, is it possible to keep that first purpose, we want pleasure, love, intimacy every time, while we deny the second purpose of a new baby most times? The modern answer is straightforward. Yes, reliable artificial contraception lets us have sex when we want without fear of conception, while at the same time not, at least on the surface, compromising on the pleasure, intimacy, or love side of things. Is this true, though? Can we have our cake and eat it too? On one hand, it would seem foolish to say, no, you can't have pleasure, intimacy, love without remaining open to new life. Certainly, many individuals have had enjoyable, positive sexual encounters while using contraception. But on the other hand, let's think back to the original points made about who God is. God is love. And although analogies always fall short with God, and we must be very, very careful not to equate sex with God, in some ways, God's love is both fully unitive and fully procreative. It kind of mirrors those two ends of sex. It's fully unitive in the sense that the three divine persons, they love more passionately than any human could possibly fathom. It is fully procreative in that Every new part of the universe which comes into being is ultimately a result of God's infinite love. His ability to provide for his creation is never exhausted. There will never be a moment when God thinks to himself, nope, that's it, I can't handle anymore, that's all the love I got. We are not God, and our ability to provide is limited. And to be clear, sex isn't even the ultimate expression of love. That is really Jesus' self-sacrifice on the cross. That's the highest standard of love. But still, we are made in the image and likeness of God as men and women. And we are called to do what no other being in the whole universe can do. That is to imitate God's love in every part of our lives, in friendship, in our familial relationships, and perhaps more than all the rest, in our romantic relationship. However counterintuitive it may seem, sexual intercourse, which is not open to life, it's less loving because God himself is the definition, the truest standard of what love really is. The fact that contraceptive sex is an opportunity for uncommitted sexual partners to be less loving, well, that one's quite obvious. If I'm not really sure about my feelings or commitment towards you, and you're not really sure about your feelings or commitment towards me, well, then contraception allows me to have and allows you to have sex without fear of repercussions, less loving sex, essentially. However, even for married couples with a rock-solid commitment to a permanent, exclusive sexual relationship and who see sex as an expression of their intimacy, of their long-lasting commitment to one another, even for these couples, contraception can have a negative impact on their love. Why? Well, marriage at its best is a relationship where the individual spouses make their lives a clear yes to the person they love. Yes, I will be with you in good times and in bad. Yes, I love you despite your imperfections. Yes, I will always have your back, and I know you'll always have mine. Contraception, though, stands as an emphatic no in the midst of all these yeses. It's a refusal to receive the gift of one another's procreative powers. Now, sometimes that refusal is an equally agreed upon decision by both parties, and the damage is minimal in a subjective experiential sense. Other times, though, the refusal to be open to life comes much more strongly from one spouse. Now, this can lead to a real breakdown of trust and connectedness as the other spouse feels rejected or even used. The question may arise in that person's heart, wait, if this person is not open to welcoming new life with me, what is the purpose of our sexual relationship? Is it just for his or her pleasure? Am I being used? Deep down, it's written on our hearts, the hearts of men and women, that trying to enjoy sex while avoiding new life is, well, we know it's not ideal. The ideal experience of sex, the best, is one between two people who have a permanent commitment, are engaging in sex as an expression of their love and commitment, and mutually agree that they would be open to receiving a new life and walking that crazy journey of parenthood together, looking upon all potential children, any potential child, as a wonderful gift, a fruit of their love for one another.
Absolutely. I think we see sometimes with friends and sometimes some family members, if they had this teaching, it would bring a level of freedom that they don't experience in their marriage and a level of intimacy that we desire for them, not in a judgmental way. It's just we want more for them.
Right, it really keeps, it keeps like God being the protagonist in our life, because sometimes in marriage we take over. You know, I want good sex, I want money, I want house, I want
Kids that obey.
All the extra kids that obey, a lot of the external things. But I think we're made for communion, and I think that if we really want the fullness of our marriage, then intimacy and communion is vital, and that the NFP just it invites us. It can feel like it forces us, but really it invites us into having to be that, having to kind of regulate myself or regulate my desires for the greater desire of what God has for us. And so I just think when I think about NFP, I think it's hard and I don't like it a lot of days, but I'm so thankful for it because it's really helped take us deeper and really appreciate. Like, you have to really appreciate one another if we're thinking in terms of allowing God to be the author of life, as opposed to, we're just going to take control of our own marriage and we're going to do it our way, and everyone's going to like it, which leaves us somewhat empty, I think.
I was exposed to, in my 4 years of deciding if I was going to come into the Catholic faith, I was exposed to eventually a podcast at the time, and this was before podcasts were popular, by a study of the theology of the body by Father John Riccardo. And in listening to him, and he just did this abbreviated 10-session podcast on theology of the body, it just was unbelievably beautiful and unbelievably intellectually forming in terms about the sexuality of men and women, and the complementarity between them, and how they're supposed to engage together and how they're not supposed to engage together. And so that is what really was the impetus, if you will, for understanding not only natural family planning, but how a relationship should look, not only dating, but married life as well, so that you, sounds corny, but you look at the woman or you look at the female and you honor her. You don't look at her as an object to satisfy your own selfish desire. And while that's easy to say, to live it out on a day-to-day basis in our culture today is very difficult.
Seriously, freely, responsibly. These adjectives must be held close to the hearts of spouses in their discernment of whether or not to add another child to their family. Well, it may not be inherently immoral to have a whatever happens, happens attitude about conceiving new life. The common language about this or that baby being an accident or a surprise, well, that's not a reflection that fruitful, passionate love in the life of the Trinity reflects. Natural family planning is beautiful, not just because it follows the moral law by not eliminating or separating the purposes of sex, but also because it leads to each child being consciously foreseen as a possibility and a gift to be cherished. Parents can say, "We knew exactly what we were doing and we wanted you to be born." In his 1960 book, Love and Responsibility, Karol Wojtyła, who later became Pope John Paul II, he explained this same sentiment of parenthood needing to be a deeply personal experience, a true act of cooperation with God, when he said, "Nature's only aim is reproduction. Reproduction depends on biological fertility, which enables adult individuals to become parents by bringing progeny, new individuals of the same species, into the world. In this respect, the species Homo sapiens is no different from others. But a human being is a person, so that the simple natural fact of becoming a father or a mother has a deeper significance, not merely a biological, but also a personal significance. Inevitably, it has profound effects upon the interior of a person, which are summarized in the concept of parenthood. For human parenthood implies the whole process of conscious and voluntary choice, connected with marriage and with marital intercourse in particular. Since marital intercourse is and must be a manifestation of love, and what is more, at the personal level, we find the proper place for parenthood too within the limits of love. In sum, human sexuality, it goes beyond a merely physical experience of pleasure or emotions of feeling intimately close with one another. It is a truly sacred act. It's a full expression of personal love that contains echoes of God's divine life. This is the same with parenthood. Human beings are not mothers and fathers in the same way that other animals produce children. Our parenthood is an expression of our personhood. Among animals, there are many instances of reproduction occurring without regard or care for the offspring's survival. Bearing and nurturing progeny reaches an entirely different level in humanity. Because of this, we must be careful to prioritize love in our decision-making. Can we as parents authentically love a new child through our providing food, shelter, clothing, and education? Can we as parents authentically love a new child with adequate affection from a psychological and emotional standpoint? Can we as parents authentically love a new child by striving to place them in nurturing social environments? All these questions, these personal, willful questions, have to come to mind every time we consider new human life. To summarize, the Christian perspective on sexuality and parenting represents the elevation of the personal above everything else. To discover the full meaning, the full enjoyment of God creating this tremendous gift of sex, we must, with all of our personal capabilities, our whole heart, soul, and strength, embrace both the unitive and procreative ends of the sexual act.
Well, we met in youth group when we were in high school, and we've been together for a really long time, right? And then when you proposed, we started our marriage prep. We had about 18 months before we got married. And during that time frame, I really started looking into what we were going to do from a family planning standpoint. And so I came across NFP first, and then we went on our marriage retreat, our marriage prep. We learned a little bit more about it, and I actually started charting before we even got married. And then shortly after we got married, we were part of the Marquette research project. This was like 13 years ago, right? 13 years ago, and I've been using Marquette ever since. In all honesty, there was never any doubt in my mind I was going to go in a different direction.
It just was. We just felt that it was a right. It was
just right for us. It was right for me, and I can say that honestly, looking back on it, it was grace, and it was my trust of knowing. Like I took control over my own body, knowing how I work and sharing it with my husband. He supported me 100% and learned and has jumped right in. And now you chart for me, so it's wonderful.
Well, I'm a biologist by training. That was my degree in my undergrad, and my master's degree was in biology and neuroscience, and so from the get-go, the moment that we took our first NFP class, we took the Creighton. We used the Creighton model immediately after marrying, and after taking the class, I found it fascinating because I liked the biology about it, the physiology, and I just kind of had this very clear, if you want to, message in my heart that this is something that you can try to do to help others, because it was so important to me to see. We did have, my wife had taken contraceptives for a while, and it made her sick. And so the idea that this was happening to maybe a lot of people and how we could solve this problem and be healthy and was very appealing.
From the time I was 12 and started cycling, it was a constant battle for me. I was unable to function, missing school, missing activities because of pain, irregularity. I would vomit from the pain I was in, and so I went on birth control. It was just the standard. And I was on that until I was about 18. I tried to come off of it I knew as a Catholic that birth control was bad, and even though I wasn't sexually active at 18, I just felt like I'm probably cured by now, I can stop. I went back on it after a week. All of my issues came back immediately. And so that really solidified for me that I have to be on birth control. And so I didn't think about it again. And then when we got married, it was kind of an added side bonus that it also prevented pregnancy. We were young, we were 22 when we got married, and so we didn't want children at the time, and so that was nice. But we joined a Bible study. And I always say, if you need to grow in your faith, join like-minded people that will make you better, because they kept talking about birth control like 3 or 4 studies in a row, and it had never come up previously. And I got to the point where I was so defensive about it that I considered quitting going. Even though these were like our closest friends, I was so sure that I couldn't change that I would rather quit the study than quit birth control. But finally I was like, I'm just gonna look into it. I got online, I found CCLI's website, I watched a couple of videos, and I started crying at the computer. It was the clearest call from God to just be like, take the leap, trust me. And he was amazing. He joined me in discovering what it was after, almost 2 years of our marriage being on birth control. And we went through the classes and really have never looked back.
So as we said, Anya and I got married, but prior to that, I got married late when I was 40, but I had been married before and it was an epic failure, and then I lived a single celibate life before meeting Anya, but I went through my 20s dating in the secular world and engaging in premarital sex. So I spent most of my life in that whole mindset of avoiding children and didn't comprehend that anybody had fertility issues. So when Anya and I got married, we were open to children and we wanted children, and we just didn't engage with NFP because I figured that was for regulating birth and we didn't want to do that. And then, as Anya said, it was 2 years later and we still hadn't conceived. And now, intellectually, I knew about natural family planning, or the umbrella of that, but not the different programs that exist underneath it. And as Anya had said, we were trying to build our house by ourselves to save money, and I was working at my job 60 hours a week. So we didn't follow the plan to get educated about it together, and Anya was taking the classes, and then she was coming home. It was like train the trainer, and she was telling me about it. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a whole different world I never even knew anything about. One, it exposed the complexity of the female body, the complexity of fertility, and how incredibly perfect things have to line up in order to conceive, which you just don't think about that in your day-to-day life because you see everybody around you getting pregnant or trying to avoid pregnancy as if it just happens miraculously on a whim. And here it was for us not happening. So I thought, well, we'll engage in this NFP. I didn't quite understand it. Some of the frustration with it was that I didn't know, and then I didn't know the questions to ask because I didn't know what to ask. So I just had to kind of digest it as I was being told and then go forth with it. What it did was allow me as what I would dub a typical male that had no idea about the female body or the cycles or anything that goes with that, and to learn that with my spouse and to try to comprehend it and understand it. And of course we had the complexity of endometriosis, which I didn't really know much about either as well. And so we got to learn that together, we got to experience it together, and I think it opened up communication between us that normally wouldn't be there at all, especially if we were engaging in contraception, which is often prescribed to mask the problem. And that conversation, that knowledge of Anya wouldn't have existed.
There were times where we were really good with the charting and really knowing what comes next. And then there were times that we weren't really great at it, like keeping track of it and maybe just more or less relying on the monitor and the days of the month, like what I usually look like and stuff like that. But then there are other times where we're really great. Like right now we're in a really good place, moving forward and like staying on top of what we need to do, like from a charting perspective. But it can be a little tedious, like having that, like, oh, did you check the monitor today? Or did you write it down in the chart? And that's why we share that responsibility. It's worked out really well in that perspective. So I'm not in it by myself, and he's not asking me like, oh, wait, what day it is? Like he knows, like just as much as I do.
Hey, is it time yet?
No, like he knows just as much as I do where we are. And I think having that has made a big difference, like being able to share it the way we do now. Technology has gone like from here to here in the past 13 years, and now we're on our phones and we share a Google Sheet, and he can look and I can look and I can add and I can see what he added and I can add things, and so like that's really great. So we're always on the same page.
The practicing of NFP, I mean, I think we spend more time brushing our teeth a day than we do actually doing like the charting, and so it's not like it's
true.
It's not like a major
like 4
inconvenience.
minutes of teeth brushing.
You know, so, and I would assume just from hearing like you come home and sharing those conversations with your coworkers that they're surprised that it's not this big laborious effort.
Sure, and there's a philosophy that says, well, people just have to make it work. And well, true, that's easier said than done, and we do know that sometimes a certain particular personality, if I'm very organized and have certain particular routines that I like to have and so forth, it might be easier if you have a very standardized version of an FB method. If you're somewhat vague and insecure about whether your peak is correct or not, you might want to have something that corroborates that peak. For some people that need certain discipline, and I need at certain times and moments, and I need to be checking for the mucus because I forgot to check throughout the day, and so by the end of the day you're guessing. For that person, maybe you need a routine and someone that tells you need to make plans for these times to make observations. For other people that sometimes have patterns that may actually not be clear, right, at least at first, maybe you rely on a hormonal assay or a urine test, a strip of some sort. So there are methods like, for example, FAM or the Marquette model that use hormonal correlations to the cervical mucus and maybe even sometimes body temperature measurements. But there are some people that also are very good about just saying, I can make this observation on my own throughout the day because I'm pretty aware of what's going on. And so, and it allows them some level of freedom of making the choice for themselves.
So I was on birth control for a variety of issues with my cycle. Not only was I able to get to the root cause of a lot of those and overcome them, I was also able to discover through charting temperature that I had a thyroid disorder, hypothyroidism. My temperatures were too low, and the instructor I was with said, I think you need to go check this out because this is usually an indicator that something's off. We should really see temperatures in this temperature range and you're too low. And so I went and got some blood work done, and it was coinciding with some other symptoms like hair loss that I was freaking out about, and sure enough, I had a thyroid disorder, and I would have had no idea if I hadn't been charting.
From really my beginning cycles as a teenager, I was in excruciating pain every single month, and even though in my young 20s I became a nurse, started working and taking care of other people and helping them with their problems in their bodies, and then going to the doctor myself, I downplayed the pain that I was in, but eventually it got to be so bad that I was bringing up the pain that I was in, and I was given treatment options like Depo-Provera, and as a nurse I knew that I didn't like the side effects that went along with that, so I kept kind of pushing for something better, something more, and so in charting and my instructor seeing these very obvious signs of endometriosis, that word had never been brought up to me, and I'd actually had an abdominal surgery and had an ovary taken out for a separate problem, and the surgeon never told me I had endometriosis, even though I had lots of adhesions, I had lots of problems. For being a young, healthy, I was like a marathon runner, he was blown away by what my inside of my abdomen looked like. So that charting and then showing that to a NAPRO doctor and having them say, this is very classic of endometriosis. I was probably 37, so to have gone through like 20 plus years of horrific pain, I was angry actually. I was pretty angry. And so, but at the same time grateful that I finally had a diagnosis and that something made sense. And then now going through the whole path of healing, I don't have 30 seconds of pain like I had. I mean, my recovery from major abdominal surgery wasn't as painful as a normal day was for me. So it was really pretty mind-blowing. I tell that to John. He's probably tired of hearing it, but you know, I wake up in the morning sometimes and I'm like I started running again after having several years of not being able to run, and I told him I went running today and it didn't hurt, like nothing hurt, and you know, it was pretty wonderful. Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge advocate now of just helping, you know, trying to help women to find the right doctors and the right treatments for a disease that affects 1 in 10 women, and maybe even 1 in 8. So there's a lot of us out there that are suffering in silence, and mainstream medical has no answers for us, unfortunately. Hormonal birth control only causes more problems. It only ramps up the endometriosis because there's hormone receptors along with it and everything else. So that whole pathway is a dead end.
Unfortunately, in the clinic, I see this every day where, for instance, she says, well, my cycles are irregular. They don't happen every 28 days like my girlfriend's happened. But that's okay because my mom was like that and my grandmother was like that. So as soon as my period started, I knew I needed to, you know, get put on the pill to regulate out my cycles. And oftentimes that might have been the case for the last 10 years. And then I meet her and I say, you know, there was a reason your cycle was irregular. Like there's a medical cause of that, and we can find that and fix it. Whereas, unfortunately, if she's been on hormonal contraception, that's suppressing her natural ovarian function. So we were not able to find the cause of her irregular cycles. And she's missed out of all that time of those endogenous hormones where there are receptor sites in your body that need that. Your brain needs it, your breast tissue needs it, your bones need it. So if we're stopping the endogenous hormones, we're actually stopping her own maturity.
So we've been married for 11 years, 9 of which we've practiced NFP, and that involves periodic abstinence. You know, early on making the transition from the pill, it was an adjustment. It's definitely a change. And especially early on, before all the rules had kicked in, there was more abstaining than there is now, and later in your cycles. And I think that definitely grew our communication with one another. We had to discuss our health together and our desires and God's desire for us, for children. I like to brag that I did eventually first bring up being open to children, you know, because early on we got married very young and it wasn't on our radar. And it wasn't until we started NFP that we seriously considered God's will for us to have children at that point in our lives.
Because we had to talk about it
right.
each month. Whereas before, we talked about it once and it wasn't a discussion again for months at times. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly it kind of brought it to the forefront. But yeah, the abstinence was not fun. It wasn't fun for me, especially in the beginning when we were still figuring it out, to feel like the gatekeeper, to be the yes-no person. That was a lot of burden on me, and I felt like I was always the bad guy. But when we kind of figured out that if I just left my chart on the dresser, and we had to have those discussions, like, you can't ask me all the time. You have to look at the chart, or you have to look at the app now. And that became easier. And sure, there are times where it sucks that when you most want to, you can't. And that's really hard. Or as you get more children, that the 1 week that you have, now is the week that everybody's sick, that sucks. But
and I do think you appreciate, though, having to put in an effort to show my desires for you in other ways, right? To show my appreciation and desires for our relationship, to keep romance alive. Like that, that is typically something that people struggle with later in their marriages. And I think NFP couples have a leg up on that. That just becomes part of their relationship.
I think we started out very, hey, we're fully Catholic and we're gonna, NFP is gonna be great and everything's gonna be wonderful and we're gonna, in a sense, abstain during those fertile times, and outside of those fertile times, we're gonna love each other well, we're gonna pray together spiritually, we're gonna be emotionally connected, during those times. And sometimes it kind of ebbed and flowed.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we were able to do that, and other times it was just downright frustrating. I think now that with 20 years of marriage, and even the last few years, we are learning intimacy in a much deeper way, even today, to where there really is more of an integration between the spiritual, the emotional, the sexual. To where really, and I guess I've believed this from the beginning, that our sexuality is at its best is a fruit of deeper emotional and spiritual intimacy. In the world, it's an activity, but for a married couple that really is trying to love one another well, it's a fruit of this beautiful intimacy that's every part of our being. But there are days when it's like, shoot, like I want to be physically intimate with my wife, and she either doesn't because she's not, her hormones are not there.
Thing. Yes.
Yeah. If I've heard that once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Chris, hormones are a powerful thing.
Hormones are a powerful thing.
But love should be stronger.
It is a very wonderful way in which you begin to understand sexuality, fertility, intimacy in a very different way. Because the truth is, probably, and I'm obviously probably making an assumption of others, but from experience of counseling couples, preparing them for marriage, etc., a lot of people see sexuality as something that is equivalent to intimacy, and it is not. I mean, it's part of it, and it is a very important one. I think a crucial one, but it isn't intimacy in itself. And so definitely it allows you through that communication, through that day that, for example, you come home ready and you say, I would love to be intimate with my wife. And it happens to be a day that is not available for us because according to what we believe God is telling us, we're not ready to have a child. So what do? And are you not intimate that night? You learn how to be intimate in different ways and to understand intimacy as a gift that can be experienced in so many different ways.
I would say it's not like a deprivation standpoint. It's not like this isn't something that Sarah does by herself and I'm just along for the ride. It's something that we do together and we support one another, and yes, there are hard, difficult times. That's not a question, but because we're united and we're in it together, it makes it
bearable.
Bearable, sure. That's not the word I was going to use, but sure.
If NFP was a person, I think our relationship of trust had to be built piece by piece, like I did. I think, like I said, Luke and Sam were both born when it was a little bit of the gray area, And
we were completely
totally
open.
Yes, we wanted we wanted to get pregnant. And so, but I think when we realized, when we really were doing the method pretty strictly, I was like, this works. And he is trusted. And this is the longest we've gone, 13 years? Yeah, Lily just turned 13. 13 years without being pregnant, and it was so funny when I went in for to my OBGYN, I'm about to be 50 this year, and he's like, girl, you're still fertile. I'm like, really? And so he said, this is a gift. And I said, it is, but we know, like, this isn't the season for that. And so, yeah, we trust NFP if he's a person. We trust him completely now,
Yeah, so it needed to work for us because I did come down with a heart condition when I was pregnant, and it didn't really, it showed up in my first pregnancy. I was passing out like every week. It was not great. And then...
the lightheadedness, dizziness.
Mm-hmm. And then just passing out, I was on the ground. I didn't know why. And then regardless, so I had we figured out what was going on with my heart. I ended up needing surgery, but it took a really long time to get to that point where I was ready for surgery, which I finally had and everything. But we needed NFP to work with us. The medication that I was on to control my heart condition was not compatible, or at least that's what the cardiologist is telling me. And then plus the fact that when I was pregnant, I kept passing out, and it was really risky. It was a risky situation. So we had to put further children on hold to deal with my condition, my heart condition, and we needed NFP to work for us, and it did. 100%. It worked for us. We never felt like there were moments that we were missing from a couple standpoint. But then again, we've got 2 healthy kids, and right now that's kind of where we're at.
We've had times where, even the temptation of going on birth control, I could never trust birth control the way I do NFP now. Knowing everything I know, knowing my cycles, knowing the information, having friends that have conceived while on birth control, I could never trust it to the level I trust NFP. And I think that comes with practice and with, a good relationship with your spouse.
The biggest difference is just the ease of the ease of technology. So, not having to worry about a paper chart. We have a Google sheet that's on our phones, and
do we share?
And kind of like the routine.
I'm not very technologically savvy.
No, you're technologically illiterate.
It's okay. It's okay. We have our strengths.
But no, we do. But kind of the rhythm that we have gotten in is, Sarah utilizes the monitor, and I upload the chart and update the chart through the Google Sheets, and it just makes it easy.
Foolproof.
Seriously. It's easy.
It's so easy. There are so many even more devices out there nowadays that were not available to us when we got started, beyond just the monitor. There are wearable devices that will check your temperature. There are crazy things out there that technology has just it's skyrocketed. There are so many different types of hormonal tests you can take at home to tell you even if you have ovulated, not like post-ovulation, not that it's coming up. So there's so many different ways to go about it, where from a natural perspective that you get in touch with your body and how it's working. That's honestly foolproof. Like we know, and then it makes it really easy.
Right. I think we trust NFP as a person. I don't know if I trust myself.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Because, when we follow the method NFP, it does work, and I certainly trust in that. So, and I still, even to this day, am fascinated by the human body and how
absolutely.
It works.
And as a holistic and a healthy perspective. Yeah. NFP is just amazing for a woman's body. Mm-hmm. Now that the studies are coming out, what birth control does to our bodies in a holistic approach. I have a lot of friends that do NFP, but not because of religious reasons, because of health and healthy, holistic reasons, mm-hmm. Because it really makes, for me, listen to my body, which I don't think I would listen to my body. How does it feel? What is it capable of? So I think it's such a holistic approach, mm-hmm. To your sexuality.
healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. You may have heard that and had your mind wander to another part of Scripture in which we heard a man proclaim, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," after laying eyes on his wife for the very first time. That man, of course, was Adam and his wife Eve, brought together by God in the Garden of Eden. In the biblical narrative, the union of the flesh of this first man and first woman is the source of the entire human race. Their fruitfulness, their fertility, it's ours as well, and it's perhaps the greatest and simplest gift we have to celebrate as human beings. We have the capability, through the loving embrace of man and woman, to perpetuate the gift of life in the world. What a mystery, what a responsibility. Such creative potential demands that straightening of the paths and the trust in the Lord mentioned in Proverbs 3. Many couples find it difficult to strike a balance between fulfilling their desire to be united together as one flesh with bringing new life into the world with a sense of readiness and peace. How can we enjoy all of God's goodness? How can we have our vats bursting with wine, as the passage mentioned, when we know how demanding providing for children can be? There is no one-size-fits-all template, as the various circumstances of life make each couple's decision-making different. Prudence and wisdom, based on God's design, revealed in science, theology, and through learned experience, these are the necessary things to strike the balance and find real joy. Hopefully, you found everything presented here as reasonable, perhaps even compelling. If you want to go further, you can easily continue your education in a method of your choice, live, in person, or remotely. It's difficult to imagine a downside for anyone who wants to master a particular method. Any of the following websites are a great place to start to find a class. One word of caution. If you're going to go further with natural family planning, we strongly encourage you to learn from a certified instructor, in person or virtual, rather than scouring the web for more info. It is awesome, so amazing to see the exponential increase in interest in NFP methods in recent years. But unfortunately, some of the most popular videos and articles, they presuppose the use of condoms as a kind of insurance policy against getting pregnant, and they also sometimes feature inaccuracies on charting and tracking fertility biomarkers. We pray that the information and testimonies provided in this video will be a help to you in your decision-making going forward. May God bless you and remain with you in every season of life.